I think downturns make you reflective. And we're in a horrific economic downturn right now. But I think in my existence, with HeliOffshore or in this industry, I think downturns in your personal life, downturns with your family, any type of challenge makes you reflective. And I've been particularly reflective about where this industry is and my journey in this. And so in setting context for everybody today, I would say we're all on a journey, personally, on safety. Our institutions are on a journey on safety, and then HeliOffshore is on this journey. That is what today is about. I'll talk about, quickly, a personal journey with safety. I'll talk about the institutional journeys with safety, and then HeliOffshore's, to set context for today. Because I heard a lot yesterday, and on my reflection, I heard a lot yesterday about how yesterday was quite good in this plenary session. But maybe, what are we trying to get to? We talked a lot about the house. We talked a lot about project management. Why? Because it's about today's next step in a safety journey. Personally, from a safety journey standpoint, I'm driving in Houston. I'm in a road that is fairly well traveled. I pull up to a light, and next to me is a family. They have a lot of children. They're in the car. We've seen this before, all of us. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter if you're Houston, Vancouver, Paris. There's a family. And in the back seat, the kids are all over the place. They're not strapped in. They're all over the place. Where are they, that family, in their safety journey? Probably at the beginning, right? They're at the beginning of their safety. All of us would look at that family and go, what are you doing? So that safety journey, they're at the beginning of their safety journey. Last night, we were all in buses, right? We were in buses in Italy. In Italy. We're all in buses, going to a restaurant. How many people wore their safety belt? No, I'm not asking. This is, again, one of the things I have to tell you about safety journeys is there shouldn't be judgments. You're on your journey. If you're going between Paris and Lyon, and you're on your journey, and you're just getting to Avignon, do you yell at somebody that you're only in Avignon? If you're going from Houston to Dallas, and you're only in Austin, you're going to yell at your wife who's driving? In my case, it's always my wife who's driving. Man, why aren't we in Dallas yet? We're in Austin. Because we're on our journey. We're on our journey. So no judgments, but how many people wore their safety belts last night? In Italy, on a bus, in the mountains, going to a restaurant, which in front of them, there was actually a sign that said, wear your safety belt, which is new in Italy. It's new. I don't remember in Italy going on a bus with it actually saying, put your safety belt on, in a bus. A lot of times in America, or whatever country, you don't even, where's the safety belt in the bus? Because you're on your journey. And I'm not saying that as a person, there should be judgments. My personal view is that you probably should put your safety belt on. You should probably tell your wife to put your safety belt on. Maybe your friend, because that's where you go to your journey. That's where we're going on our journey. We don't have to yell at each other. We're on a journey. Institutions are on their journey. Industries are on their journey. When I joined the Air Force in 1982, the Air Force was losing 48 aircraft a year. 48 aircraft. 70 crew members were dying every year. And that was okay. That was okay in 1982. I showed up at Columbus Air Force Base to fly the T-37 and T-38, and the week before, they had a collision between two aircraft, killed 3 pilots. That was not okay. And then all of a sudden in the 80s, people started getting the clue. They were on their journey. The Air Force started figuring out that it's not okay to lose 48 aircraft, 2 squadrons of fighters. The cargo ships and the bombers, they got it 20 years ago. They were actually ahead of the fighters in their journey, because if you're flying fighters, of course there's going to be problems. Of course there's going to be accidents. Where were they, where were we in the Air Force on our journey? When I left the Air Force in 1994, that year was the first year we did not lose one single fighter, and we were in combat operations in Iraq. That's where the journey is. Where are we in our journey now? Bill Childs, James Drummond, Bill Emilio, 5 years ago said, no more. I don't want to be in a car watching a family with their children in the back seat, unstrapped. In this industry, that was the equivalent of what we were doing. We're competing on safety. We weren't sharing even the simplest information. So today, 5 years later, roughly, we are taking that next step in the journey. I asked somebody last night, amongst my second frizzante water, feeling the effects of that frizzante right now. I asked somebody, would Fuzzy Bitar been invited to a HeliOffshore 5 years ago, even 10 years ago? And the answer was probably no. It was a kind of a closed industry. Clients, OEMs, operators. So today we're on our journey. Gretchen, Francois, and this team have set yesterday, in many ways, they did it a little bit reverse. I'm not a big metaphor fan, but they did it a little bit reversed. They kind of showed us what, and we agreed on how to put our seatbelt on, right, in our journey. Today, we're going to talk about what the seatbelt looks like. So last night, everybody was saying, well, why are we talking about how to put a seatbelt on? Remember in the airplane, when they give you the safety brief, put your seatbelt on. Like, you're going like, yeah, well, because you're far enough in your journey, you're almost to Dallas when you go on a fixed wing. So today, we're going to describe what the safety belt looks like. I know it's a bit reversed. Yesterday, we talked about how to put the safety belt on. Yeah, it was kind of boring, project management. But project management in a mature institution is easy. In a nonprofit institution in which we're with a lot of our competitors, and we're with our OEMs, who are supply chain, and our clients, that's hard. Project management in a nonprofit that actually is trying to get something critical done, that's hard to measure sometimes, like Bill said. How do you measure that you haven't killed somebody yesterday? So we're today going to describe that safety belt, what it looks like. There are 3 things. We've kept it focused. Only 3 things that we're going to talk about. Pay attention. One of the descriptions of the safety belt is what we're going to do on the critical part of information sharing, which in many ways is the reason HeliOffshore exists. Because the 3 original founders of the Joint Operating Committee, and then what became HeliOffshore with ERA and then PHI, they were about information sharing. And it was done very informally, but at least it was being done. Remember, on our journey? Today, we're going to focus on how that information sharing takes the next step. It's critical. And again, I'm not going to be judgmental, but HeliOffshore is a heck of a lot more than just paying your dues. And the teams have done a great job in getting everybody here. So we have actually the capability and the will now to do this. We actually have the ability to do it, but the information sharing is the foundation. So we're going to describe what that means and what you got to commit to. The second piece is incredibly important because it's the effectiveness, the operational effectiveness, how we can actually communicate about critical areas like HTOS and other things in the cockpit. These are layups on our journey. So we're going to talk about that. And the third thing is the resilience and the reliability. This has been one of the key critical areas of working with our OEMs. What are the single point failures that we can identify and mitigate the risks, the bow tie? Those are it. 3 things. That's what we're doing today. We're going to describe the belt. Yesterday, we described how to put it on, the project management of that. And now it's up to us on our journey to put it on. So we're all on our journey. I have to say, I've been so impressed with the deliberateness of how my fellow board members have described what they're trying to do. Lance puts it, and yesterday he put it very well, on how to describe what we're trying to do. Chris talked about, in context, the project management of this, which, again, sounds boring. Remember, like the airplane, put on your safety belt? It's boring, right? We got to do it. Today, we're going to talk about what it looks like. So I want Again, thank everybody for yesterday. I've been at EHOCS before where it hasn't been as interactive. Today is going to be, again, interactive. You got to see Lance, who I think is incredibly passionate in his way. Today you have to suffer through me. I'm passionate in my way. But I'm going to keep this moving. And working with Gretchen and Francois, I just give you a couple tasks to do today. Pay attention. Ask questions. Make it interactive. And then we'll leave here on that journey together as an institution, people personally, and then as an industry. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to have Francois come up here. Every now and then, in my own way, I'll try and spice it up. And again, thank you for your attention.
Okay, back up. The clicker is here. Got the clicker. Matteo, you come up and take that podium over there, and I'll stand over here. And we're gonna kick off this morning briefly with the info share, and we're going to talk a little bit about the success we've had to date. And I wanted to specifically separate out. These are the folks that are going to be talking to you this morning in the safety intelligence piece. And then I'm going to set out what we're going to do and introduce Matt. So first of all, I wanted to separate out where we sit in the safety performance model, so you're clear at the beginning of each session how this fits to the plan, right? So obviously, the enablers, that's the one at the bottom, and you can see safety intelligence. That's what we're talking about in this morning's session. Right, InfoShare. What Matt's going to talk about is the HeliOffshore Safety Intelligence Program. What we've been doing for 3.5 years is already sharing events, right? So you have an event and you share it. It is purely a communications tool and a lessons learned tool. It is reactive. It is an event happened and you share it with your community to sort of say, hey, listen, don't make the same mistake, or this happened to us, or we have this problem. How did anybody else fix it? And we've created a forum, conduit, call it what you will, but it's a communications tool. We're not capturing any rate data on it. We're not being specific about, right, you must report this and this and this, so we can't trend it and we can't measure it. But it's a good lessons learned tool, and it has a place in our community. And we will keep this, but I wanted to separate this from what Matt's going to talk about so I don't cause confusion. And what we have to date is we have 88 events, and those are events that have taken place. That's right up to April this year, so it's current. It just gives you region, helicopter type, and there's some, event type and event category. You're not supposed to read that. It's just a quick shot of the dashboard to let you know that that information is being captured and shared amongst the community. And what we're trying to talk about here is the power of information sharing. And that's why we've got Matteo here, because when we first started this, before we got all technical and had nice dashboards and a platform to do it, we were capturing it through like a PowerPoint slide. They were sharing it when I first arrived in HeliOffshore. And, the thing about the 139 autopilot dropout came up as an event. And we had the right people around the table to have a conversation at that time. And we discovered that, hey, this is an opportunity for us to gather and collect some data. So it was really one of the first things in terms of gathering FDM data that HeliOffshore did. And that group of people decided to share their FDM data. And they did. And they captured a whole lot of these events, which enabled us to now have a conversation with the OEM. And at that point, it facilitated a much more open conversation. And so what we're trying to show here is a little bit of a success story of how the power of information sharing led to conversation and collaboration with the OEM to then develop a solution to the problem, which is what's taken place. So I'm going to hand over to Matteo. He's going to talk you very quickly through what they did at Leonardo, and then I'll wrap this up before I hand over to Matt.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. No, it's been actually a long journey in that sense. Maybe too long for that, for what it was supposed to be. Anyway, if you look at this autopilot story, it's something dating back to 2014. So let's say that this info share system, but not only that one, in general, the sharing of information highlighted 2 points. The first was that we didn't have the sides of the problem. We had the single people telling us things, and we were trying to collate information as much as possible. So the fact of trying to put together as much information as possible helps you to give you the sites and the priority to fix something. That's the first thing that we learned on this one. We had our systems. I mean, any OEM has his own system, but in reality, we saw that many of the information we got were not collated together properly. The second thing that is important is that we were able to share what we were doing. So it's a two-way, let's say, channel open. That is, we did a bulleting, we did another fix, we did another modification to the flight manual, and then we did a software change, and then we actually were able to deliver the fix. The journey is not over. The journey is not over on the autopilot and on other things. But the importance that we actually can deliver is the info share must be a two-channel, a two-direction channel. It cannot be just, I'm telling you something. It must be very relevant to the quality of the information we get, and that's what we were working on. And the second thing is that it allows us to basically give feedback on the single steps we do to fix something, because nothing will be fixed in one shot, and that's more than obvious. So it's been really actually a good experience for us, and we want to keep going with this info share system for other things.
Thank you, Matteo. Okay, so to wrap up this session, we're not going to take much of your time. When we got together in Budapest last year, I think it was Liz, Ardella, and myself, we stood up and we talked about the safety data program. And I've been working with the team, Steve Predmore and Robert Bouillon and the rest of the team to pull this project together. It's been a lot of work. And we worked with GE, Tonic, NLR, and we've now pulled together a really good program. In other words, what we've done is we've pulled probably the world's best experts at creating an information sharing data platform. And I can't express to you how big a deal this is. It's a cornerstone project, but how big a deal it is for this industry. And I've said countless times, this is our opportunity, I believe, to leapfrog certainly what the fixed wing industry is doing in terms of data sharing. It is going to be transformational to our business. And on that note, one of the big things that came up from last year was governance, security. Everybody sat there and said, we get it. We understand that sharing data is going to be powerful for all of us. But you need to make us feel comfortable, that little warm glow of confidence. We need that from you. And HeliOffshore needs to deliver that before we're going to share a thing. And we've done that. We've put the governance in place. We've put the structure in place. We have the securities. You're going to hear from Andy Heather at Tonic how the security is there for the data, the de-identify data. You know, it's in place. We have it. This train is leaving the station. So you asked, we delivered. And when we sat and had a 3-day workshop in London with the whole team, they said, look, this is a big deal. You're going to need somebody to run this ship because, Francois, you can't kind of manage this on your own. And I don't have the skill set to do it. I mean, I helped deliver it and set it up with Steve and the rest of the team, but we need somebody with the right expertise. And just at that time, Matt was leaving Cranfield University, Dr. Matt Greaves, and I found out about it, picked up the phone and called him toot sweet, and I said, are you free? And he said, yeah, I'd love to come and work with you guys, rather insanely. I'm not sure why. But he's accepted the challenge, and he's absolutely the most ideal person to do this because he's well qualified on both sides. He's good at dealing with all of our members, and he's good on the technical side. So he has those skills, which is going to be very powerful to help us develop the program. And I'm going to let him introduce himself, get a little bit of background about where he's at. And Matt, you want to come up? And we'll hand over to Matt Greaves.
Thanks, Matteo. Thanks. Great. Thank you very much, Francois. Although it's a bit of a shock to find out I'm working for free, apparently. That's Matt, are you free? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the Safety Intelligence Program. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction and talk to you about what we've been doing with this. And I know some of you have met me before, either at Cranfield or in different roles, or some of you I'm new to, and what you're thinking probably is, who's this guy? So, my background is as an engineer. I spent 4 years at Kinetic in Farnborough, a science research company, and then I was at Cranfield University, where I was the head of the Safety and Accident Investigations Center. What we tend to do there was train aircraft accident investigators from all around the world. But we also did quite a lot of safety research projects. So I was involved in a number of projects, including trigger transmission after Air France 447, so detecting when an aircraft's in the middle of an accident, the HTORS alerting that Tim's going to talk about a little bit this afternoon, and also some work on some novel hum sensors going inside the gearbox. I joined HeliOffshore, as Francois says, in January this year, so I've been working with them for 3 months. So if you like what you see today, it's really all down to my hard work in the last 3 months. If you don't like it, it's really Francois and Gretchen's train set, you know, and the problems were laid a long time before. So I'm leading the Safety Intelligence Program. Some of you may know me as the guy who just emails you and says, please sign your MOU. So, what do I mean by safety intelligence? When we talk about safety intelligence, it's an easy buzzword to use, but what do I mean by it? Well, there's this definition, which is a little clumsy, but it gets to the point, which is that it's the collection and analysis of data for actionable results to bring safety benefit. We are not just collecting data for, pardon my language, shits and giggles. We are doing it to actually change this industry. We're not just trying to document where the industry's at and then shrug and move on. We are gathering this data to make a change. We are trying to learn what's going on, and we are going to take actions on it, and we are going to make a safety benefit. It's not just an end within itself. So when you look at the safety map, our actions and where we're going with this, actually the data runs across it. It's not an activity in itself that we're interested in doing just for twiddling our thumbs. Actually, it feeds into every different work stream that we have. And because it's so based in operations and in delivery, that's why we're working with Tonic, with NLR, the Dutch aerospace industry, and with GE Digital, the entity inside GE that deals with flight data. We're working with those guys because this is about frontline operations. It's about delivering real results. So, one question that I get sometimes is, aren't we already gathering data? Don't we already have these numbers? Isn't it already written down? There's this report over here. And when we look at some of the people who are in this game, there's EASA, Flight Safety Foundation, SIAS, obviously, IOGP, and HSAC, all produce reports, all have numbers in them. Fuzzy showed yesterday the graph that Jonathan had showed about IOGP membership and accident rates. Actually, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. Where this data exists already, we're not going to come knocking on your door to try and reproduce it. But there's a difference here. You guys in this room, and I'm talking about operators and OEMs and regulators and everybody who's connected to this industry, you have access to different data. And you have a slightly different motivation than some of these other programs. And the really biggest difference about this safety intelligence program is that actually it's owned by you. You are HeliOffshore, as Francois keeps telling us. It's not me and Francois and Gretchen. It's you guys. You are HeliOffshore. You own this program. You run it. It's your data. What do you want to do with it? There's no point in keeping it in a silo. If you have a need to understand the problem, share the data. We'll corral it for you. But you get to drive what we do with it. And that's fundamental to what we're trying to do here. We're starting with the operators. And so I'm going to focus mostly on the operators because that's who we've been asking for data. But this program also applies to OEMs, IOGP, and oil and gas customers, and the regulators, and the HeliDeck certifiers, and so on and so forth. But we're going to start with the operators. So why would we do it? What are the benefits to the industry? Well, as hard as it is to believe, I don't think we really know something as simple as the accident rate. We don't really know what our exposure is. There are some numbers kicking around, and they're probably not a million miles out. But I'm not convinced anyone can hand on heart say, This is how many hours the offshore industry flew. This is how many accidents we had. This is our accident rate. And so we need to understand that true safety picture. We don't understand the accident rate. We don't even understand our exposure properly. The other initiatives that we're having in HeliOffshore, one of the ways that we need to figure out if they're actually working is by measuring, by seeing the situation now and seeing whether they're having an effect, seeing whether we're actually making a difference. If not, is it something wrong with how we're doing it, or do we need to do it differently, or is it that it's not being implemented? But if we just send things off out into the industry and go, well, I hope that helped, we're still not having any, we haven't had another accident, so maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. Actually, if we can monitor more closely, then we can understand whether or not it's really having the effect that we wanted it to have. It can guide our safety strategy. Actually, there's some things in the data, I suspect, that none of us know about. Everyone has their own little version of the picture, but I think there are things in there that we're going to find where we go, actually, you know what, our exposure in this area is much bigger than anybody ever thought, and it doesn't show up as any individual, but when we get the data together, then actually it's going to show up some interesting things. And it's going to highlight some common issues. This siloing that's happened in the past, if we can break that down and start to share some issues between us and start to say, actually, you know what, yeah, we've had some of those, we can start to address the problems properly. For the operators, like I say, we're dealing with operators to start with, but for the operators, you get the opportunity to benchmark yourself against the industry. That's not a I'm better than. It's a chance to understand whether or not you're doing things the way the rest of the industry is, or whether there's some difference in your norms. Now, those may be absolutely fine. We are not trying to create jelly mold operators here. We're not saying you've all got to do the same thing. But where there are differences, I would hope that you would go back into your operation and say, we're a bit different here. Are we comfortable with that? Do we know why that is? And if the answer comes back, yep, we're absolutely fine with that, then that's great. But if you go, why are we over at this end of the curve? Then there's questions that you can start to raise. It can support your safety cases, actually, where you're trying to make an argument for doing a particular thing or doing something a particular way. If you have data to support it, then actually it changes everything about how you present it. It can highlight risks that you haven't experienced, but the industry has. This is particularly true for some of the smaller operators. If you don't have a lot of hours, but you're running a particular type, then you can learn from the other people and find out what it is that's going on across the other types. Equally, people who are introducing new types can sometimes experience problems that'll help you further down the line. It can highlight the industry-wide issues, the points that are worth us attacking together and coming together to solve problems. We can do some visualizations and some dashboards and some working with the data that you probably can't either afford or justify or wouldn't be bothered to do on your own, but actually we can present back to you to make life easier for you to work with. And of course, the big thing is we can work with larger data sets. And we can also we can coordinate with people like the regulator, and we can help share that information backwards and forwards to try and ease the burden on you guys. As Francois said, last year you said, just get on with it. Just do the data program, please. But we need some assurances on governance. We need some assurances on security. So there are assurances on governance. You've all been sent the MOU, which has in the back a long document about how the data is controlled, who gets access to it, who can see it, what has to happen for approvals. There's a strict process that has to be followed to get approvals. I can't decide that I want to start a basketball team and therefore come around and ask for the heights of all of your personnel because actually I think we've got a really good opportunity to change the basketball world. But actually there's the SSC or the SSG has the authority given by the HeliOffshore board to run this program on a day-to-day basis, and we put requests to them who decide whether or not a request is appropriate, and that happens before it even comes to you. So when a request comes to you for data, it's already been pre-approved as an appropriate thing to be asking for, and that there's a good reason behind us asking for it. We're not just asking for fun. There's then strict rules about how we handle that, and I know governance is tedious, particularly on a Sunday morning after, what was it, 5 presenters, you said, Jonathan? Yeah. But it's really important. It's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about, but everybody cares about when it's time to actually sit and sign. And it's in there. We're revising it. We're going back to the board on Monday with a revised proposal for how the governance works. But it's not a change to the ethos. It's just nailing down even further how these things are sorted out. I'd like to call Andy Heather up. Andy works he's a director for Tonic Analytics, one of our partners in this, and he's going to just talk to you briefly about how we secure your data. It's the other side of the other piece of the puzzle that you care about. You say, okay, I agree this is a useful thing to do with the data. What are you going to do with the data once I give it to you? Andy, thank you.
Maybe just give you a little bit of introduction to who Tonic Analytics are. As a business, we specialize in a secure collaboration and big data analytics platforms in the aerospace and law enforcement market. Biggest part of what we do is actually in commercial air transport. And typically in that market, what we would do is bring together live data feeds from airlines, maintenance data, aircraft parametric data, fault data. We integrate that in a big picture with things like weather data, geolocation, shop records. And then when we've built up a total picture of the operation for an airline, what we then do is use predictive analytics to really drive actionable outcomes. And the goal of that is to drive operational costs down and to drive maintenance costs down for the airlines. So that's our primary business. And I guess just looking around the room, the first thing you could say is, how's that relevant to HeliOffshore? And I guess the first thing I should say is for the last 2.5 years, Tonic have been part of the HeliOffshore team. And what we've been doing is taking the same technology that we use in the commercial air transport sector and using it to support the underlying platforms, data platforms for HeliOffshore. So, for example, if you've logged on to the space, the working environment for the working groups, that is the same underlying technology platform. Francois talked about the InfoShare. The back end for that system is the same secure data platform that we're using. And through the Safety Intelligence Program with Matt, what we've been doing is extending the use of that platform for HeliOffshore to include things now like usage data, flight hours, operation sectors. We're starting to bring together event data, such as return to base events and the information around them, also FDM results. And we're bringing that data together into the same platform to actually support the initiatives that HeliOffshore are working. Francois mentioned, and Matt also mentioned, governance, data security. It's an essential part of all of our aerospace activity, and actually also our law enforcement activity as well. I can't emphasize too much how critical the aspects of data security, integrity, and governance are to us as a business, but also to our platform solutions. How do we move the slides on, Matt? Is there a... You've got it.
There you go.
In that area, what we've done is we've partnered with some major organizations in this area. So, for example, at the front end of the platform, anyone who's logged onto the space may or may not realize, but that front end of the system is provided by an organization called Jive. And they are one of the big enterprise providers of secure collaboration platforms. They provide all of the single sign-on, the authentication, the permissions. So when anybody accesses anything in the collaboration world or the data world for HeliOffshore, it's going through Jive's platforms and they manage that integrity for us. And they're a major player in the industry in that area. At the back end, things like data encryption, we use industry best practice in that area. So all data is encrypted within the warehouse. We don't just encrypt the data when it's stored, we also encrypt it when it's in transit. And Tonic itself is an ISO 27001 accredited organization. That's the international standard for information security. Beyond the back end, at a physical level, we're actually partnered with Microsoft, and Microsoft provide all the physical hosting security. So any data shared with HeliOffshore is actually physically protected through our partner in Microsoft. So Matt asked me to do a relatively short pitch here. It's great to get an opportunity to talk to you about the platform a little bit, but at the end of the day, this is not really about the platform. It's about the outcomes. It's about what we can do with the data. I've been involved in the data side of the industry probably for 30 years now. I originally started with the development of hum systems in the late 80s, all the way through now to cloud-based data analytics platforms. And from my perspective, I'm seeing a sea change in the industry. I'm seeing an awareness of the value of sharing this data. But also, I think what we're starting to see now is the first tentative steps to actually share that data We are now seeing collective operator data coming together on the platform. We have a number of years now worth of info shares. And for me, it's a really exciting time. We have to get it right at a data level. That's just paramount to what we want to do. But really, this is about outcomes. So I think I'll stop talking about the platform here, and I'll hand back to Matt and the rest of the team to actually talk about some of the progress that's been made on some of the projects over the last, I guess, 6 months now. So
Great.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Rob.
Cheers. So, as I said, the authority for this program comes from the HeliOffshore board. It's managed day-to-day by the SSC, who give the approvals. But we've split it into 3 working groups: the intelligence analytics, the system reliability, and the flight data monitoring working groups. And so to give you some idea of what we can do with this data, we chose 3 sort of quick-win demonstration projects to show you exactly how this could work and how it could benefit you. So we're going to run through each of those in turn. So I'd like to ask Robert Bouillon from PHI to come up, and he's going to talk to you about what the Flight Data Monitoring Working Group have been doing and how we've been gathering data and what we can do to show you with that, to give you some real-world examples. Thanks, Robert.
We're going to work the clicker.
Great.
Use this. Mic's on?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
So flight data monitoring, I'm going to jump right in and go ahead and give the vision. The vision of the flight data monitoring program was really for the group to develop and validate a common set of FDM capabilities that we believe can support increased hazard identification and flight safety improvements. The objectives overall, we want to enable a secure data, confidential data sharing platform, and that's where HeliOffshore, Tonic, and GE provide that platform for us. We also wanted to make sure that we target the critical phases of flight, and initially we felt like the approach and takeoff profiles were the areas we need to focus on. We also wanted to provide an opportunity for the operators to benchmark themselves against the aggregate industry. I think it's very important that we all believe we're doing and operating in a safe environment in a certain way, but having that opportunity to look at ourselves against the industry is a very important aspect of what we're doing. Obviously, we want to capitalize on some of the work that's already been done by the various work streams, specifically the Operational Effectiveness Working Group. And actually, you're going to see in the data here that we actually relied on some of the work that they did for the approach path management guidelines to actually drive the direction of this particular work group. We also want to have the opportunity to support some direct initiatives that are coming from those work streams, whether it be the automation work group, the FDM, the FCOMS, the HTOS, those work groups. We believe that FDM can support those items, and as we move forward with those individuals, help them to validate whether or not some of the initiatives that came from the work groups were actually implemented at the front line and had the desired results. Finally, the providing visibility to aircraft type-specific, we'll say typical or normal flight profiles. I believe most of us would believe that if we wanted to describe our profiles, we would probably go into our operations manuals, our training manuals, or our flight standard manuals. But the reality is that normal flight activity actually takes place out on the flight line. So that's where FDM, whether it's an FDM program or a LOSA program, can really show you actually what normal is. I know for PHI, even when we're looking at developing new event sets for when we first started chasing stabilized approach, for example, we went to our flight standards group and we said we really wanted to look at not only pitch and roll during that critical phase of flight, we wanted to look at the change rate in pitch and roll. And when we went to flight standards, they said there is no standard for change rate for pitch and roll on that final approach. And they were correct in that, but what we were able to do is we looked at 4,000 offshore approaches, and we were able to establish what the min, the max, and the average was, and that helped us develop a standard which didn't exist anywhere else. So just an example where FDM can be effective for you. So the members that are actually in the working group, we currently have 9 members actively participating in the work group. Pretty good representation of the industry, everything from large to small operators, the UK operators, West Africa, North America, South America, and Asia are represented in there. So as the working group decided on a tactical approach, we agreed upon one particular aircraft, and primarily that was because the majority of the operators had at least one of those aircraft in their fleet. So we ended up choosing the AW139. And again, we relied upon the work that was done by the Operational Effectiveness Workstream in their approach path guide, and we decided on a capture window of 0.5 nautical miles to 0.1 nautical miles from touchdown as the area that we were going to focus our attention on. And we chose 6 specific parameters: airspeed, ground speed, vertical speed, heading, roll, and pitch. And again, the idea was not to provide a detailed analysis of that segment of the approach, but to really proof of concept that we can come together collaboratively and share data basically in a secure and anonymous fashion. And I think Matt's going to show what the team was able to capture and show what the potential down the road is for we can do more sharing and more analytical information on the data. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. Can we switch over the screens, please? Thank you. So, don't touch this because the pixels are still a little bit wet, because the data only came in the last few weeks. But what we're looking at here is a tool that we just put together so that the operators can look at their data. So this is a distribution of ground speed in this column, pitch, rate of descent, and roll. So max, average, min. Anyone who works with FDM goes, that's a tiny data set. 6 parameters and 3 values of each in a window. It's a tiny, tiny data set, and we know that. But what it allows us to do is to just get a little bit of confidence in the group about sharing some of this data. And straight out of the box, what we can see is that across the industry, actually, max ground speed in that window is really across quite a wide range. So the highest value in that 0.5 to 0.1 nautical mile range was somewhere between 20 knots and about 120 knots, which is a pretty big window in just half a nautical mile out. Ground speed average for that region is coming down, and the minimum ground speed, as you would expect, is coming smaller. But it shows us how wide some of these differences can be, and therefore it's maybe not a one-size-fits-all issue. Rate of descent, again, we've got some fairly heavy rates of descent there as max values, maybe up as high as 1,300 feet a minute. The average is much, much closer, as you'd expect, and then the minimums are down here. The roll's an interesting one because we've got a few degrees of roll as a very heavy distribution. There's a really long tail on that. Actually, it's way out, going up as far as 30 degrees. We can then start to play with this. So this is a 2-dimensional plot of maximum ground speed against maximum roll, but we can choose whatever we like. So if we take, I don't know, maximum pitch against max roll, we can see where each flight is. So each dot is a flight, but this is how we're able to share this data, and the working groups are able to work with this data without ever knowing whose flight it was, but we can start to look at some of the interesting things. And so if we say, okay, let's have a look at this point over here. Let's say, okay, there's something unusual about this flight. We've got a maximum ground speed of 20 knots, an average and a minimum ground speed of 20 knots. We've got a rated maximum pitch of 0 degrees, and we've got a rate of descent about 300 feet a minute, and an average that's actually positive. There's something in that flight that's interesting that you can pull out just by this plotting. So we would go back to the individual operator, not everybody, say, have a look at this flight ID. You might want to see if there's anything interesting in there for you. Similarly, we can look at something at the other end, and we can say, okay, right, this is a different set. We've got more like 80, 100 knots of maximum ground speed. And we can look at it in a whole bunch of different ways. We've got about 16,000 flights registered in this set alone. Where the real value for you guys comes is saying, okay, you're an operator, here's your data, here's the industry data without your data in there. So the green is the operator and the red is the industry without you in there. And we can start to say, look, this is where you're different, this is where you're the same. And you can see that this is not no particular person's data. This is a random selection. It's everybody's data and nobody's data, if you like. But you can see that actually this operator has, or this fictional operator has ground speed that's maybe 10 knots higher than the industry average. If you're comfortable with that, that's absolutely fine. But we've seen some operators where there's some really big differences in their operations against the industry means. And we've been able to go back to those operators with these graphs and say, have a look at this. Satisfy yourself that you're comfortable with that. And there's already some conversations going on with training captains and so on to say, is this what we're expecting? And we can do that across the board, and we can even give you plots that sort of show where you are. Here, the blue is the distribution of the industry. Each blue dot is an industry flight, and the red dots are, again, a particular fictional operator. And you might say, yeah, I'm reasonably comfortable with that, but actually there's some up round here, there's maybe some outliers that I'm more interested in because they're outliers for the industry as well. Suddenly your data takes on a whole new world, which is rather than saying, how is this flight in my set against all the other flights in my set? You're now saying, how is this flight in my set against the rest of the industry? Does everybody else think this is unusual? Or is it just me that thinks this is an unusual flight? Okay. Robert, thank you.
I was going to say, I think initially there was a lot of apprehension by the members to just share the data. But I think not only PHI, but other operators that were involved in the initiative felt like they gained something just from the collaboration, the engagement, the conversations around flight data monitoring. I know PHI went in and as a result of the work we did with the team, and we found small holes in our FDM program where we were able to correct, again, just from having those conversations with our competitors around FDM and how we're collecting the data. So it was a positive win for everyone. But again, by only collecting average, min, max, and doing it for that entire window, you're very limited on what you can do as far as for really getting a good picture of that approach. So where we're going from here is taking maybe a deeper dive and a more analytical look at the approach and breaking that segment up even further. So should we be looking at those same parameters at the 0.5 nautical mile, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2 as we get close to the touchdown, and then we could paint a better picture of what the normal offshore approach actually looks like. Again, the approach that our guys are flying day in and day out. Secondly, we want to continue again to support the various initiatives within HeliOffshore. And I'm sure that as those initiatives get pushed out to the field, we're going to be looking for, every operator is going to be looking for ways to monitor whether or not we were successful in implementing that at the front line. And again, I think FDM can play a big part of that. Engaging with our OEMs to improve FDM support to operators. From the software providers, I know we're looking for more efficient means to analyze the data. You know, we have a team of analysts that go in like every other operator, and we're having to validate every one of those events that we build within our system. We would like the OEMs to help us and help us automate those systems where we can automatically validate those items where we know we have a high level of confidence. So if we have a 98% confidence rate on a specific event that we've built in our program, we would like to be able to automate validation of that without it impacting other events. And right now, in most software packages, if you select auto-validate, it auto-validates for every different aircraft type and different event. So it's functionality providing us the ability to be more efficient. Also from the aircraft operators, often what we see is we don't have enough visibility in the cockpit as to what switches are being manipulated at what time. And that helps us when we're looking at how the flight crews are going through their checklists. Having that visibility with some specific discretes is really going to help us provide a better picture. And then finally, I think everyone's looking for the big data support. And that's where, again, GE and Tonic and Matt bring their expertise to the game. And if they can provide for us a platform by which we can efficiently upload raw data to the system and then do that analytical work for us, looking for those anomalies that we either can't look for ourselves, we don't have the expertise, or we just don't have the resources to do, you bring that to the table and we all benefit from it.
Yeah. Right? Great. Thank you, Robert. So, thanks very much, Robert. I'd like to bring Steve Predmore up. Some of you may know Steve Predmore. He's not very well known in the industry, are you, Steve? No, okay. Steve who? And he's going to talk to you a little bit about the Intelligence Analytics Working Group. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Matt. So you saw, this is one of the 3 working groups that we showed up earlier, and you just saw Robert with some great example of the kinds of quick analysis that we can do this early on. Robert's FDM working group is really focused on a specific type of data to address specific types of questions. A little bit later, you're going to hear from Dave Baliff, who's talking about the safety reliability data working group, which again is focused on a specific range of issues and using certain kinds of data to address specific issues. The Intelligence and Analytics Working Group is a little bit different in that what we really exist to do is to support those working groups and future study teams and the industry as a whole on building basically the research program, providing the technology and the analytics support that we need in order to study an issue and be able to draw conclusions that let us know where we are. So to go back to Jonathan's analogy of the car on the journey, we exist to build the dashboard so that we know where we are on the road and what our progress looks like and how we're doing. And that's really what the focus of our action group is. And before I go any further, let me note just the other folks who are involved. Andy, you've met. Andy Heather is from Tonic is part of the working group. We've got obviously Matt and Francois from HeliOffshore. We've got Robert Bouillon from PHI. Edwin Soders. Edwin's here somewhere from Westar. He has the pleasure of doing midnight calls on a regular basis and has just been a huge asset for us there. We've got Liz Ardila from GE, who's helping us with the big data platform. There's Liz here. Absolutely, that's great. And then we've got also Joram Verstratum and Michelle Piers from NLR. And if you're not familiar with NLR, that's Netherlands Aerospace Research Center, an extraordinarily capable and experienced research group focusing on a wide range of aerospace issues. So incredible analytic talent there, also working with us as well. So again, we've got a really capable group, I think, to work through building the necessary tools that we need, identifying the kinds of data, working with working groups to identify the kinds of data. If this is the issue, here's the data that you need, and here's what you need to do with it. And then again, building the tools to get the data into the system so that we can use it and measure effectiveness. Okay, so as Matt said a year ago, we all got together and said, yeah, okay, it's time to do this. Let's do this. Let's start collecting data. And again, you saw a little snippet of some of the data we've already gathered. In terms of building the dashboard, where do we start? And sort of where we decided to start is really built around these criteria. We wanted to go out and collect data that was already readily available. Okay, we didn't want to create new work for operators in particular. None of us need that. So what data is out there that we need? And obviously we wanted to, we're still in this process of building trust. So we wanted to pick data that we can use that is not overly sensitive or certainly proprietary. We needed to pull together, we thought it was important to pull together the data that didn't require redefinition, that everybody sort of measures it the same way, and we weren't going to have to go through a lot of gymnastics to put the data together into any collective form. And finally, we wanted to collect data that is going to allow us to do a lot of analysis going forward. In other words, it would be foundational data that allow us to do a lot of work in the future. So, in the last 2 months, we've made 2 data requests. The first one, and this is not sexy stuff, but this is just basic usage data, okay? And to kind of go to Matt's, back to Matt's earlier remarks, we don't know the basics for the offshore industry around how much we fly, what types of aircraft we fly, and how much, how much we fly in different regions. The basic information about how we operate that tells us what our exposure is. And that's why we want to know. It's not for commercial reasons. It's not to know that this operator flies this much more than that operator, or this fleet flies this much more than that for. That's not what we need it for. It tells us what our exposure is that allows us then to measure risk. And this is really foundational for any study that we want to do going forward. If any question that we have around that speaks to more or less, improving or getting worse, better or worse. Any question we want to ask around those kinds of issues require this data. And so this is where we felt like we needed to start. And as operators, we pretty much have this available to us. We might measure it a little bit differently, define it a little bit differently, but generally it's there. And so we began just asking for this data from operators. And I think in a minute, Matt's going to show us a little bit of what we have. I haven't even seen it yet. So this was the first data usage, or first data request that the board and the SSG approved, and that's gone out. The second one is around air accidents. Okay, and we define that as Icao Annex accidents. Those of us who are operators know what that is. It's pretty much defined everywhere the same way. And these are events that are known. They're pretty much in the public domain. So we're not asking operators to submit events that that aren't widely known generally, that maybe are real sensitive and not the kind of things you want to communicate to others outside your company. These are accidents. So again, to go back to the very basic question that Matt asked earlier, what's the accident rate for the offshore industry? I don't know. I don't think anybody in the room knows. And we've been trying to get those data for internal purposes, and it's really, really difficult to get it. So hopefully this time next year we'll have a good sense of that. And again, it's not just to know what the rate is, but if we're going to measure our performance, if we want to know how far down the road we're going to be in 2 years, we have to know where we're starting from. And this is a good start. Now we're quickly going to find that that just knowing about accidents doesn't tell us a whole lot. And it's really, what are the causal contributory factors that are driving these accidents? And again, as we look to introduce mitigations, solutions, and so forth, are they effective? We have to know that. So we're quickly going to move beyond accidents, I think, but we're not there yet. And we've got to build trust to get there. So those are the two data requests that we made in the last 2 months. And you're going to show us something. Yeah. I haven't seen it either, so let's see what we have.
So we've had hours contributed from a number of operators. I'm not going to tell you how many, but they've come from all over the globe. The number of family types we've had, so these, in the top left-hand corner, we've got types of aircraft that are being operated. We've got 18 families. So a family would be a 212 and a 412, or a 365, 155. All the Super Puma types are bunched together in families. We're talking about a large variety of types. Just ignore this little glitch here. This was a few months that the one operator has just backfilled with us. So actually, it's more like up here. But this is 1.6 million flight hours across the industry. It's come from, we've got contributions from every country. And you can see that in 2017, at the moment, we're looking at around 270,000 hours were flown by the operators who submitted. I reckon, at an estimate, we've got about 50% of the world's fleet in these figures. So that may be putting us somewhere around 3 million flight hours. But that is finger in the air stuff, and we won't know until we get everyone's data. But I think that for the first time, one of the first times, we're starting to look at data from operators shared together about how many hours they've operated on which aircraft types and where. We've also got, that I'm not showing here, some sector data, which is also starting to reveal some really interesting things. Because, of course, in fixed wing, what we do is we talk about flight hours, but we also talk about number of operations, number of sectors or flights, or however you want to put it. And when we look at the sector data, of course, as we all know, different aircraft are used for different things. And so flight hours isn't necessarily always a great metric, because sometimes you've got one type that maybe you're doing more hours on, and the sector time is maybe a quarter of what it is on the other aircraft. So our exposure, in terms of landings and takeoffs, is actually as much as 16 times higher. If you've got 4 times the hours and 4 times and a quarter of the sectors, that's 16 times the exposure on that type of aircraft. We can't just work in base flight hours. And this seems like really simple stuff. I know this is the most tedious dashboard you've ever seen. I know it doesn't seem to convey much. But what, for me, it shows is the power of this group and this forum coming together and sharing this data, possibly for the first time ever, to actually show us the real picture. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And yeah, obviously we're not showing any accident data at this point. No. We're just getting those data in, and
well,
again,
they're nice and small. I'm pleased to say there's only
Yeah, and we would hope
yeah.
that would be the case. But again, it's a starting point. just going to lay this out in terms of next steps. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Most of it has already been talked about by Jonathan, by Matt, and by others. But I want to focus on the trust issue again. Our experience over the last year, since we all committed here in the in the room we were in, that we were going to do this. But as we began to go out and say, okay, all right, it's time. I give the data. Sort of like, oh, okay, all right. But I want to know about governance. I want to make sure the data are going to be protected. So the team, my colleagues, have worked extraordinarily hard. A lot of time with lawyers, and that's been fun. A lot of time with lawyers, building the governance, building the MOU in a way that provides, the necessary protections, but isn't so prescriptive that we can't do things that we know that we're going to need to do. So we're at a starting point, and we've now asked for data. We're now starting to get it, okay? And to go back to Terry's remarks yesterday, and we both lived this, and let me talk about the fixed wing experience really quickly to give you a little bit of context for where we are. You heard a lot yesterday about how far ahead the fixed wing world is. There's a very simple reason for that. When you kill people, 300 at a time, when you have 900 fatalities related to air accidents in the course of a year, it gets a lot of attention. From regulators, from the traveling public, you're highly motivated to move very, very quickly. And that's really what it was. They're not any more noble or capable than we are. It just, people tend to die in much larger groups, and it gets a lot more attention. And Terry and I were approached by the Associate Administrator of the FAA and said, enough. We're trying to improve the airspace system. We're trying to improve airports. We know there are threats out there. You guys are in the best position to tell us where they are. And you have 3 years. And one of two things is going to happen in 3 years. Either you're going to come to us with a system where you're aggregating, putting your data together and telling us where those threats are, or we're going to do it, the FAA. And I can promise you that whatever we do in 3 years is not going to be anywhere near as good as what you can do in those 3 years. So that was the challenge, right, Terry? And we did it. We pulled everybody together, but it was really, really difficult. There were a number of very, very hard meetings. We're a step ahead of that. We have everybody in the room. We have all the key stakeholders. And in many respects, we're starting off much more difficult. We started with FOCA or FDM data in those days, which is pretty easy to put together. Okay? What you do with it is a little challenging, but it's pretty easy to put together. We're starting with much more complex data in many respects, with events and reports and things like that. That's a little harder to put together, but we're going to get much farther down the road, I think. But if we retain the commitment, if there are concerns out there, if there's active resistance to what we're trying to do here, let's get it out on the table, let's talk about it, and let's get past it, because we can, and we will. Really, really, really encouraged by what we've seen in a very, very short period of time, in 2 months, and I know we're going to get there, but we need everybody on board. We need you to commit if you haven't. And if there's a specific reason why you don't feel like you can do this, let's talk about it. And let's address it, because there are ways to work that. So that's my time. Thanks, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Dave? So, did you steal the clicker? Oh, no, there we go. So, Dave's going to talk, Dave Baliff from CHC is going to talk a little bit about the return to base study that we put together through the TSG working group.
I can't do two things at once. Okay, so next we're going to talk about, in the spirit of data, something that came out of the system reliability and resilience workstream last year. And one of the hypotheses that was put forward was the fact that an RTB represents risk. It represents risk because it is something that is a diversion to the normal flight plan. So it's a diversion in that it's atypical, and it's going to cause a diversion for the crew, for the pilots, and for the engineers on the ground. It's also going to maybe upset our customer because they have to change their plans with respect to moving people on and offshore. And then finally, once the aircraft's on the ground, it's going to be another unscheduled intervention to the aircraft, which in itself could add additional risk because people are now touching the aircraft and it wasn't planned. So the hypothesis is that there's risk associated with RTBs. So about a year ago, we went out to a small group, and this was before we actually formed the whole data sharing. Scott led the charge on that one, Scott Carmichael, and he got about a half a dozen of the operators who came back with their RTB data. We had this data set. Scott had done some work with it. When Matt came on board, we said, okay, Matt, here's another data set. Let's try to look at that one from a different perspective.
Okay. So let's have a look at what we did. this is an RTB dashboard that we put together just to give an idea of what the data looks like. Because we don't have the hours, because we've got a small number of people, all of these hours are faked and all of these locations are faked, so you can't identify anybody. But the RTB events are real. So this particular operator had 224 RTB events in the last year. It runs up to 2017, so in the last 12 months I'm talking about. And we can present that as a rate. We can compare that to an industry rate. And we can show you, we can track you that over time in terms of an event rate, in terms of events, in terms of flight hours, again, which is why we need Steve's underlying flight hours data. We can also group it together into aircraft types, into regions, and we can also chunk it down into the different ATA chapters. I know you all love your ATA chapters, and most of you were probably reading them last night. But just in case you weren't, 31 is instruments, 73 is engine, fuel, and control, 22 is auto flight, and so on. So what we can do is start to break down some of these RTB incidents and say, okay, well, the area of this is the number that you had on a particular aircraft type. The color relates to the rate. So we're saying, okay, well, let's see what aircraft 4 has for us in terms of the different ATA chapters and what's caused it. And actually, we can see that by far the highest percentage of RTBs on that aircraft type are chapter 73, which is engine, flight, engine, fuel, and control. What we've got down here is actually something based on the text because we don't have the second taxonomy built in yet. But what you can see is that actually of these, I need to check my numbers, 81 events that they had on that particular aircraft type in that ATA chapter, 73 of them, 90% of those were related to FADEC. And so straight away, you're talking about a high-value component that's being changed a lot and is giving you a lot of the issues that Dave's just talked about in terms of RTB. And so by breaking this down, you can start to see the red lines, by the way, are the industry averages. Because this operator had a lot of data, they represent a good dose of the industry average. But we can already start to see, okay, maybe there's something worth looking at here. Maybe this is low-hanging fruit or whatever we want to call it, but maybe this is something worth addressing. Equally, if we shift to a different operator, we can see, and again, locations and flight hours and everything is faked, so these rates aren't real. But what you can see is that the way that their ATA chapters are split up, there's something very different for their chapter 67, which is rotors, flight, and control. I've got it written down here. I'm not just casually tossing it off out of my head. But 67, rotors, flights, and control, you can go, okay, well, the industry average, that red bar, is about 4% for that ATA chapter. Ours is more like 12. Okay, we've got 3 times the number happening. Is this something that's specific to us? Is this something about our operation, or is it something about the way we're operating the aircraft? Is it something that's unique to us, or why is there a difference here? And you can start to investigate that. But without this information, you're left there going, okay, well, is that normal? And finding the answer to that question can sometimes be really hard. And when you look down, when you look through the causes for that particular thing, actually it's a servo pressure sensor that's the issue that's coming up a lot. And you go, okay, well, that single thing is giving you an awful lot of risk and an awful lot of operational turmoil, when maybe if we gathered all these things together and addressed them properly, then maybe we could get to a lot of this noise and cut it down. Okay, if we can go back, please. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think that was the first pass, and we looked at this preliminary set of data back in Vegas. It was, the end of January, when Matt showed it to the SSG, and it raised a lot of eyebrows. And I think that the power of it is what we're talking about here is with respect to collaboration. With a larger data set, each of us as individual operators is going to be able to understand where are we relative to other experience, and then I think the fact that we can break the data down with great ease relative to ATA chapter and then dig into that one even further is going to very succinctly draw us to, is there something to be learned there? Now, with respect to prioritization, because we want to solve problems, we want to solve them quickly, the beauty of this, I think, is that FADEX, for example, I can say to the engine manufacturers, hey, how about you take this and dig into this one? Autopilot dropouts on a particular aircraft type, we can take and pass over to an OEM and say, how about you dig into that one? So I'm hoping it can help us prioritize with respect to, okay, so what is happening, and then how can we dig into it to understand how do we mitigate that risk? And at the end of the day, I think that's the end of it. So the suggestion going forward is that we want to get more data. Just like Steve was saying, the request is out there, went out about 3 to 4 weeks ago. So far, we've got about a half dozen. Look, the request to the rest of us, could you please get your data in? If you're not going to support the RTB data, same thing. Just say, I'm not gonna vote on this one, right? We'd like to understand, do we have what data set and from who? Then once we get that, hopefully by 22nd of May, we want to do the analysis again that Matt's performed, and then take the conclusions from that analysis to the TSG and say, okay, as a team, what do we want to do with that data next?
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Dave. So, what happens now? Well, the first thing to talk about is who signed an MOU. So we're not naming and shaming, but we are going to say who has signed. So these operators have all signed the MOU. We're talking about 25. They're all in the program. 25 have all contributed data or have signed the MOU, and that's out of 43, I think, is the current number of operators in our program. This represents about more than 85% of our current members' fleet. We've got a lot of potential data here. We've got a lot of people who have signed up. The MOU doesn't commit you to anything. It says, if we share data, this is the framework in which we're going to do it. Each time a request comes, you get to say yes or no. If something comes to you that you're not comfortable with, that's fine. You just say, I'll pass on this one. But actually, we can build a really, really big, powerful data set. We chose those 3 quick win projects just to show you what the power of these tools are. If you have ideas for what you would like to see, if you have particular projects that you would like to chase, then we have a mechanism for that. You can feed that back to the working groups. We can take that up and see if that's a shared concern. In terms of the stage gates, Rajesh showed us this yesterday, I'd say we're somewhere around here. Actually, at Budapest last year, you said, let's do this. Sort out the MOU, sort out the governance, sort out the data security. And so that's what we've been doing. So we signed the RFP, we've got the MOUs signed, we've built the MOU and got it signed, we've built in the governance, we've built the platform. There's an awful lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes to make this look the way it does, that's once it's built, is nice and easy, but takes time to build. And we've done a few proof of concept studies. That's all these things are. They're not supposed to be beautifully honed dashboards. They're things to show you, look, this is what you can do with this stuff. And this is where we are now, and we're going ahead. This program is leaving the station, as Francois likes to say. And the question is do you want to be part of it? I'm hoping that with what you've seen, you've gone, yeah, I can see how that would be useful. If you don't think that, I'd be interested to know that too. If you think, yeah, I like the program, but I've got a couple of concerns, or can you tell me how you sort that? Let's talk about it. Like Steve says, we can have this conversation. This conference is a place where actually we're building some trust, and we can stand up and say, you know what, Matt, I like it, but can you just satisfy me on this or whatever? So what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to get the remaining MOUs signed. So if you haven't got an MOU signed, if you haven't signed one yet, I happen to have a few just here. If you'd like to sign one right now, that's okay. Somebody did sign one yesterday, so that's absolutely fine. We're going to widen our data sources. There are other places we can draw data from. We can take things like the global Flight Global Accident Database. We can draw information in like that helps us supplement and cross-check and make sure that we're not bothering you for information that's publicly available and that we're capturing everything we need to. You guys can suggest study areas. If you go, actually, I'm having a real problem with this, or I'm really interested in whether or not this is an issue, or I want to know this, I want to change my operation, and I'd like to know this, then we can talk to you about that. Suggest your study areas that you're interested in. We're going to try and automate the data upload. It's entirely achievable. We just need to work with you guys to make it as easy as possible as you can, for you. And that means we get to a stage where actually each month, an Excel spreadsheet gets generated, it gets uploaded automatically, and you don't have to worry about it. You still know it's happening. It's a push from you, not a pull from us. But actually, this initial data ask, I know, has been a bit bumpy for some guys. Asking back to 2013 is not always the easiest thing. There's been a few people dusting off file and going through old books, but we're there now. And so now, as we go on a month-by-month basis, then actually we can start to generate this data. And the more regularly we do it, then the more powerful it becomes. And one very specific thing that comes up is actually, if we take the HTORS project, we don't have a really good baseline at the moment of how many false positives we're getting, how many alerts we're getting. Some of the data frames don't even record that GitWiz binary. And so maybe we can work to generate that baseline data before we get the HTORs implemented so that we know whether or not it's having that effect. So we can measure how often we're getting false positives at the moment, how often the alerts are going off, and check that whether or not we've had some improved warning times and also some reduced false positives.